In this lesson, we'll discuss intermolecular forces, or IMFs, also referred to as van der Waals forces. When you are finished with this video, you should be able to describe dipole-dipole forces, dispersion forces, and hydrogen bonding. These are types of intermolecular forces. We will also talk about the strength of intermolecular forces, and then later we'll practice predicting the types of intermolecular forces that occur between molecules. So what are intermolecular forces? They are forces of attraction that exist between molecules. That prefix inter means between. Intermolecular forces are always weaker than chemical bonds. We're going to discuss three types of intermolecular forces, but no matter what type of intermolecular force we're talking about, they all have this in common. The negative end of one molecule is attracted to the positive end of another molecule, as we see here. This Greek letter means partial. So polar molecules have a partial negative end and a partial positive end. And since opposites attract, the negative end of one molecule is attracted to the positive end of another molecule. So why study intermolecular forces? Well, by discussing intermolecular forces, we can talk about physical properties such as melting point, boiling point, heat of fusion, heat of vaporization, or solubility. One property that we will focus on is melting points and boiling points. The stronger the intermolecular forces are between the molecules, the higher the melting points and boiling points tend to be. And that means that more energy is required to overcome those intermolecular forces before the phase changes can occur. So now let's talk about the first of our three types of intermolecular forces, hydrogen bonding. You maybe have heard of this one before. It's called hydrogen bonding, however, it is not a chemical bond like an ionic bond or a covalent bond. It is the strongest intermolecular force of the three. And in order to have hydrogen bonding, you must have hydrogen in your molecule and one of these three very electronegative elements, fluorine, oxygen, or nitrogen. One way you can remember this is chemistry is fun. So within the molecules, you can have a hydrogen-fluorine bond or a hydrogen-oxygen bond or a hydrogen-nitrogen bond. You do not need to have all three. Hydrogen bonding occurs between polar molecules, and basically what happens is the hydrogen atom on one molecule is attracted to a lone pair on the fluorine, oxygen, or nitrogen on a different molecule. In this graph, we're looking at boiling points for molecules that contain hydrogen. Not all of these molecules would exhibit hydrogen bonding, only the ones that have fluorine, oxygen, or nitrogen. You can see the boiling points of those molecules are much higher than the boiling points of the other molecules in the graph for the most part. Again, high boiling points are due to strong intermolecular forces, which is what hydrogen bonding is. Here you can see a representation of hydrogen bonding between water molecules. The positive end of one molecule attracted to the negative end of another molecule. That's also shown here. And just to compare with what we're looking at in this diagram on the right, this is representing a covalent bond. The dashed lines are showing the hydrogen bonds. Oxygen is so electronegative that it does a much better job at attracting the electrons in the chemical bond away from the hydrogen. So that leaves the hydrogen very positive, and then that attracts to the lone pairs that are on the oxygen atoms. You don't see them shown there, but there would be a lone pair here and here on every oxygen atom. Our second type of intermolecular force is a dipole-dipole force. This is a more general intermolecular force, whereas hydrogen bonding is very specific in terms of what atoms need to be there. For dipole-dipole forces, we really just need polar molecules. Polar molecules, we say, have permanent dipoles, so they are permanently polar. But once again, the negative end of one molecule is attracted to the positive end of another molecule. That's the intermolecular force. Our third type of intermolecular force is a dispersion force, or a London dispersion force, or a London force. Those are all the same things. This is the type of intermolecular force that occurs between nonpolar molecules. Dispersion forces are the weakest intermolecular force, and although nonpolar molecules are not permanently polar, we end up with what's called induced dipole forces in between the molecules. So when we're talking about intermolecular forces, we can talk about forces of attraction between polar molecules, those that have permanent dipoles, and nonpolar molecules, those that do not. I will talk about the induced dipole forces in the next slide. But for polar molecules, the type of intermolecular force is dipole-dipole, with hydrogen bonding being a specific kind of dipole-dipole force. For nonpolar molecules, the only type of intermolecular force that they experience are dispersion forces. So even though we say that nonpolar molecules do not have permanent dipoles, they do end up with what are called instantaneous dipoles. And this is just created due to the random movement of the electrons within the atoms. For a moment, the electrons end up crowded on one end of the molecule, and then that leaves the other end of the molecule slightly positive. This instantaneous dipole can then cause an induced dipole in another atom or molecule that's nearby. So let's take a look at a diagram as to how this actually happens. Let's look at the set of hydrogen molecules that are on the right here. You can see that they're nonpolar, but then just due to the movement of the electrons, instantaneously, we end up with a negative end and a positive end to our molecule. The electrons in the molecule next to it are attracted to this end of the molecule because they are attracted to the positive end of the molecule across from it. So this induces a dipole in the molecule next to it. And then we end up with this intermolecular force, the negative end of one molecule attracted to the positive end of another. And even though hydrogen is not a polar molecule with a permanent dipole, it ends up with what's called an induced dipole and creates this intermolecular force. So hopefully now you can describe the three types of intermolecular forces: hydrogen bonding, dipole-dipole, and dispersion.